So now I get to introduce our speaker. Pam Thomas is our speaker. She's a senior fellow at the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, and that seeks to improve the quality of life for all Kentuckians through research, education on important policy issues facing the Commonwealth. So Pam has a law degree from the University of Kentucky and a Bachelor's of Science in Business from St. Bonaventure University in New York. Prior to joining KSET, Pam was the committee staff administrator for the Appropriations and Revenue Committee of the Kentucky General Assembly. Pam has extensive experience in the areas of tax policy, budgeting, education, finance, and workforce policy. Pam also spent some time with the State Justice Cabinet with a focus on juvenile justice, policy development, budgeting, and strategic planning. So thank you for joining us, Pam. We're interested to hear your presentation.
Sure, and my understanding is I've got about 10 minutes and I'm going to talk pretty quickly and it'll be a high-level overview, but the very last screen will have my contact information, and I want to encourage anybody, if you want to, I can get really in the weeds on a lot of these things, and so if you are a person who also likes to get in the weeds, or if you just want to know more information about some of the things that I'm going to mention at a high level, please do feel free to reach out to me. And also, is somebody going to be monitoring the questions and telling me about them? Because that's hard to do when you're
Yes,
presenting.
we will, Pam.
All right, and now I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Can you see? Let's see. Can you see my presentation now?
Not yet.
Okay, let's see.
Click on the share screen. You'll have to select which screen you want to share. Great. Now we can start seeing.
Now you can see it. All right. So I want to start with I want to go before COVID-19 and talk a little bit about what was going on in some of the Eastern Kentucky counties. And I've actually been doing research, and I'm going to be writing a paper next summer about some of the tax and budget issues that Eastern Kentucky counties are facing, because I think that before COVID-19 there were some real issues going on. And over the past few years, as a lot of you probably know, Eastern Kentucky counties have been hit with a lot of things that are really detrimental from a fiscal standpoint. The first thing that happened is that the way that unmined minerals are taxed was changed, and the value was reduced significantly. So a lot of counties that are coal counties took a pretty big hit to their tax base there. And then there has been a reduction in property tax revenues for a lot of counties because coal counties have gone idle. They filed for bankruptcy, or they pulled out, or they've just stopped paying their taxes, which then basically creates this detrimental impact on local governments who rely on those monies. And then the third thing, also correlated, is that severance taxes are way down, and the severance taxes have taken an absolutely huge hit since COVID-19, and that is expected to continue. So there have been these series of things that have happened that have hurt the revenue, this is before COVID, of a lot of the counties in Eastern Kentucky. And in addition to the revenue hits, there have been increasing costs. Everybody's heard about the pension issues in Kentucky, and they're both state and local. Even though the locals have contributed everything they're supposed to all along, the contribution rate has gone up and has become very, very high. And then for counties that operate jails, the cost of that has continued to grow. Kentucky incarcerates more people than pretty much any other state but Louisiana on a per capita basis. And counties really don't control that, but they have to pay for it. And so going into the 2020 legislative session, many cities and counties in Eastern Kentucky were already facing significant budget shortfalls that would have been difficult for them to solve without some help, and then COVID-19 hit. And so COVID-19 is going to add more stress to budgets in a lot of instances that were already stressed. The League of Cities did a survey of cities, and as a result of that survey, cities are expecting at least 85 million revenue shortfalls this year, and then an additional 180 million next year, and that probably will be worse than that, honestly. In this situation, local governments that rely more on property taxes are going to fare better, because property taxes, first of all, are more stable over time, and it takes quite a bit of time for anything in the economy to hit the value of property. So counties that rely more on property taxes will not be hit quite as hard. The revenue bases that are really being hit right now are the occupational taxes, the restaurant taxes, and the lodging taxes. And honestly, we're lucky in Kentucky that we don't also have a sales tax, because that is the base that the states that rely more on that are being hit so much harder. So the local government, in Kentucky, local governments don't have sales taxes. And so we're actually lucky for that here because we don't have people relying on it. And of course, those are going to continue over time, and we don't know how long the impact is going to last. The other big thing that's going to happen with cities and counties is that they're going to receive a lot less money from the road fund. The road fund is where the money comes to repair the roads and bridges. Counties are responsible for half of all the roads in the Commonwealth and 2/3 of the bridges, and the road fund revenues are absolutely tanked. The two big sources of money there are the motor vehicle usage tax and the gas tax. And the money that goes to the locals comes from the gas tax. And with people not going anywhere, the gas tax is way down. And as I noted, the full impact isn't going to be felt about what's going on right now because the payment of taxes lag the actual economic events. And so we aren't going to see the impact of what has happened this month until probably about the end of June. And then we'll know a little bit more. And so what does this all mean? What this means is local governments need help. Cities and counties are required to balance their budgets every year. They face restrictions on the issuance of debt, and they have the limited ability to levy taxes. Without assistance, cuts are going to have to be made, and in some cases the cuts will be essential services and will include layoffs because the biggest cost for pretty much most governmental entities are their people. And what that will do then is have an additional negative drag on economies because in most rural jurisdictions, the biggest employers are state and local governments. When you think about it. And so if state and local governments have to make significant cuts, then that's going to really ripple through your economy. And right now, I know the economies are all suffering because of local businesses being closed and small entrepreneurs having to close their business and questionable. But if you add the government on top of that, you can imagine how that really is going to sort of snowball. And this is just a quote from the governor from one of his briefings last week, where he says that state and local governments just have to have federal assistance. They're the only governmental entity that can borrow and print money. And honestly, the state's impact, which I'm going to get into a little bit next, is so dire that the state really can't help local governments a whole lot now. So local governments and state governments need a lot of help. Switching now a little bit just to what has been going on at the state level, Kentucky has had cumulative general fund budget cuts of over $2 billion since the Great Recession. So unlike a lot of other states that have started to move forward and progress and having fewer cuts, Kentucky has continued to cut revenues at the state level. We have the highest rate of child abuse and neglect in the nation. Our foster care slots, need for foster care slots have skyrocketed. And in fact, now with the courts closed, the number of children that are in foster care is the highest that they've been in modern history because children can't leave because the courts are closed. And our caseloads are double what is considered to be the best practices. Our mental health funding has not had a meaningful increase since the 1990s. And our public health departments have seen staff reductions of 34% since 2012, which weakens the ability to deal with something like the coronavirus. And this is outdated now, but more than 1 in 3 workers in Kentucky have filed for unemployment insurance, and it's more now. And the joblessness is expected to continue. These are some numbers that came, CBO projection for the US unemployment with COVID-19 through 2021 is at 9.5%, and Kentucky's unemployment rate is typically a couple of percentage points higher than the national average. So what this shows is that the expectation, the job loss expectation is that it will continue for a while. So we've had a little bit of federal aid in Kentucky so far, and it's been helpful. And the governor just announced yesterday that $300 million of that is going to come back to counties and cities. We put a blog out this morning, and I can show you later on if you're interested, that has an interactive map that you can click on, and you can click on your county and you can see what the projections are that your county will receive. Well, I'm ahead of myself a little bit here. So the $300 million that's going to come to the county from the CARES Act can only be used to offset expenses that are related to COVID-19, so they can't be used to fill budget holes. So the fact that the revenue is down, and that's one of the biggest issues facing local governments, this money can't be used for that. But it can be used to pay salaries for frontline health workers and other things, and masks and other things directly related to COVID. Kentucky's budget gap, though, is expected it could reach up to $7 billion, and our general fund is about $10 billion a year. So it's a big amount of money. The House passed the HEROES Act last Friday, and it includes $1 trillion in flexible funding for state and local governments. This is the map I was talking about. So I had a blog that posted today about the need for aid for local governments, and there is an interactive map in that you can click on, and you can see your county and what each city is projected to get and what each county is projected to get under the HEROES Act. Now, the HEROES Act is not what's going to pass. It's the opening salvo, if you will, to start the conversation about more state and local aid. But it does give you a good idea for what is needed. And so really what we think is needed is that state and local governments need flexible funding to use as they need to use it, and really especially to help fill in that revenue hole that, you know, even if your counties went out and levied more property taxes, the amount of money that they're going to generate is not going to offset the losses that they're going to be losing when the businesses aren't open that generate the other taxes that are collected. We need to extend the unemployment benefit expansion a little bit more because it's going to take the economy longer than we have right now in order to recover. Food assistance needs to be increased to help folks, and they did that during the Great Recession, who otherwise could not afford to put food on the table. Additional stimulus payments for those who are left out. Part of what stimulus payments do is they enter money into the economy because people use that money to buy the things that they need in local economies. So it isn't just giving people money, it's giving people money and supporting local economies. And then safety and support for essential workers, preserving health coverage, and strengthening housing assistance are all things that will be needed. And so one of the things that I think as Kentuckians that we need to do is to get our opinion known and get it known to the folks that are in Congress that we really need state and local relief, that essentially you probably have all heard that Senator McConnell had said at one point that states should just file for bankruptcy. Legally, states can't file for bankruptcy, counties can, but that really isn't a very good solution for anybody. And so I also know that a lot of times people think, well, it doesn't do me any good to get in touch with Senator McConnell's office because he's not going to listen to me. Well, if we all think that, nobody contacts him, he thinks none of us care. So I think it's worth the effort to try to reach out. And so some of the other things that can be done with regard to this whole issue with local governments and the need for support is we can write letters to the editor, we can submit op-eds, we can connect the dots for reporters to the extent that you have relationships for them. We just had a sign-on letter that had 48 organizations that signed on to it that we sent, basically asking for state and local aid. And it's a good idea if you can do it, if you're on social media around your organizations that you represent, to create posts that connect federal aid to the issues that you are intimately involved in and that really matter with you. I know that some of the folks on here are with arts organizations, and what's going to happen probably is that because art isn't art and parks and rec and things like that really help quality of life because they are not constitutionally or statutorily mandated, those are the things that will go first. And so it's really important that people understand the importance of those things and that you engage your networks of people to let them know that they need to let their voices be heard on these issues because it's really important. And so the bottom line is that if we want to protect the important services that we all rely on, and we also want to try to prevent the recession from deepening, we need fiscal relief now. And like I said, I'm really happy to answer any questions if you have follow-up or thoughts or anything else you want to share, information that you want. We've done, at KSEP, we've done quite a bit of work around COVID on all of the different issues having to do with various topics. And so I'm happy to share any of that with you. And I can show you the interactive map if you want me to. I have it on the screen. You can just let me know.
Pam, yeah, thank you so much. That was very sobering, and there was a lot of really good information and next steps for us in there. I'm only seeing one question right now. The question is, Wise County, Virginia Tourism just announced that they are shutting down. Kentucky has been investing in tourism over the past few years. Where does Kentucky get its money to support tourism, and how may this source of funding be affected by COVID-19?
Well, the primary state source for tourism funding is a tax on hotels, hotel room occupancy, that then gets distributed back out to tourism agencies. And you can probably guess what's happened to that particular source of revenue during COVID-19. And that probably will continue, because even if you look at what's happening, and I know that some of you have, with reopening, the way that those kind of facilities have to do that is they have to have a lot of vacant time. So after someone stays in a room, then they have to leave that room empty for a couple of days before they can let it again. So it'll be a long time before that revenue source comes back. So I think that a lot of the state funding that has been invested in tourism, and even a lot of your local governments have taxes on hotel rooms to support your tourism commissions, and even those are going to be deficient in revenue for quite some time. And so you're going to have to think about other creative ways to come up with resources.
Thank you. Is anyone else seeing any other questions?
Yes, there's a question that came in. Oops. Do you have any idea what the budget impacts on schools will be?
Schools have gotten some direct aid under the CARES Act. Schools primarily also rely on property taxes. And so because of that, they won't be as dramatically impacted as a lot of counties and cities that rely more on the excise taxes will. But the state ability to support the SEEK formula is going to be compromised. When you think about, if we don't get federal relief, the level of cuts that are going to have to be made at the state level in order to balance the budget, education will have to be cut as, you know, one of the single biggest sources, K-12 in education, one of the single biggest things that state resources get spent on. So the question will be, if that happens at the state level, then will there be a shift more toward locals, and what will locals be able to do? It's definitely going to be hit. It's just a question of how deeply. And there are a lot of unknowns right now with regard to how things are going to play out.
We have our question here. How can a city move from a heavy reliance on occupational licensing fees? Property taxes are restricted in the amount they can be raised each year. Restaurants, transient, alcohol taxes have restrictions on use. What other revenue sources are other cities exploring to reduce the reliance on payroll taxes?
Property taxes actually are not restricted. A fiscal court can levy any property tax that they want to. They're just subject to recall if they levy something that generates more than 4% new revenue. And there's some complications to that formula that I'm not going to go into. So they actually are not restricted, but they can be recalled. They're guaranteed a 4% increase. A lot of them do not levy beyond that because, well, for various reasons. And what we talk about in tax policy is called a three-legged stool, and it's a good idea to have a mix of taxes because they react differently when things happen in the economy. Like I said before, property taxes are more stable with what's going on right now. Sales taxes or excise taxes, because your restaurant tax is essentially a sales tax, they fall when the economy falls. And so your property taxes is propping you up. When the economy is strong, then the occupational taxes and the excise taxes do a little bit better. But you're right, there are limitations on what local governments can do. And the sales tax probably isn't an answer, honestly, especially for the more rural counties that don't have a big commercial base. You know, you're not going to get a whole lot from that. And restaurant taxes can only be levied by 4th and 5th class cities. So expanding the ability to do that to more counties and cities is one answer to that question. It's regressive. It's going to hurt poor people more than it's going to hurt wealthier people, but it is one particular solution. If you had that tax right now, though, you know, it wouldn't be helping you a whole lot because the entire economy is essentially shut down.